Welcome to the Fleet Geeks podcast. We're here to help develop fleet and transport professionals. Do you want to progress and develop your skills and knowledge? We promise to bring lively conversation and debate around interesting issues and keep you bang up to date with changes in our awesome industry. The Fleet Geeks are a community of professionals, and if you enjoy the podcast, why not join the discussion for free in the Fleet Geek community over on Facebook?
We've got a card in.
Yeah, we've got a card in. We've got the red light rolling, mate. We're ready to go. So we were just playing around with a few of the little sounds on the podcast. Can you hear this? Yeah, I know, we're good.
It's a round of applause. We like a round of applause, don't we? Everybody loves a round of applause, don't we? That's the way around.
Oh, mate, it's been a little while, hasn't it?
Time flies. We're in February. That's given. One of the things you'd have thought we'd have learnt by now because we've been doing this a year, but the thing you have to learn about podcasts is not to put anything that would time stamp it.
Yeah, make it evergreen.
People listen to on the. I'm the same. I consume podcasts, and you listen to them on the. So you think, I was talking about a time of year that doesn't mean nothing to me. But yeah, well, let's put it this way: we are well into the new year now when we record this. Unbelievably, yeah,
absolutely.
Time has flown,
and we are on top of the first set of the Transport Manager CPC exam. So we thought we actually ought to do. I was just thinking about it. Let's not let that slip. We ought to do a 1-year anniversary podcast.
Yes, that
celebrate a year. I think it wasn't quite in February. I need to look back at when it launched.
I think we recorded it in February.
And I think we launched in March. So I think we probably need to do a 1-year anniversary, mate. Maybe find our favourite episodes or something.
Definitely, that would be a good one.
Fave episode.
Get Jamie B back for a reunion.
Oh, mate, wouldn't that be amazing?
He'd be up for that,
I reckon. Yeah, that's a good shout, to be fair. So we'd like to hear from you. What's your favourite podcast episode been? Do you know what? As we record this, the Fleet Software podcast just went live this morning.
All right.
Flagship have already had a inquiry.
Oh, wow.
Based off the back of it, which is amazing, isn't it? Had a couple of
inquiries
come in. So, fantastic. Really pleased with that. But anyway, on to today's subject, which is what next after your Transport Manager CPC. So we're getting a load of freshly minted transport managers come through, having taken their exams, and they want to know what to do next now that they've passed their qualification. Now, what do you think to that, Mike? What do you reckon?
Well, yeah, it can be very, the process of going through the study and then taking the exam, the stress of the exam, sometimes afterwards when they get the results, which is great, there can be a bit sort of, what do we do next? How do we go?
Is it something you get asked as part of the course?
Yeah, there's a lot of people on the course have not. I get a mixture really of people who are doing it as a part of a corporate thing. So they work for a big company or big corporation, big operator, and they're doing it really in terms of career progression. So but they're still new. They're still newbies, and I don't think there's many operators out there that would take a first time. Somebody who's just passed their TMC and say, there you go. There's 300 vehicles to run. You're the transport manager. So even people within a corporate setting maybe are a bit nervous, and particularly when you talk about companies that operate vehicles as an ancillary part of their business. So, they're not necessarily transport experts, the company, but they've now got this freshly minted transport manager. So, and of course, the other side of that coin is the external transport manager, people who have done the exam to become, to give them another income stream or to give them another string to the bow or to try a new job completely. I think there's several different ways of looking at what to do next, but it is difficult, isn't it? What do you think? Would you? I think clearly recommend experience. Is that correct? I think.
I think experience is really, really important. I think it's really tricky because I know, and I'm just going to say it because I know I'm going to recommend mentoring. I think the tricky thing with mentoring, like anything, having worked in lots of different work environments with lots of different people, it's a bit like when you go in a vehicle with another driver, you'd look at all their bad habits. Yeah. And I think that's sort of one of the challenges with Transport Manager is how do you know you're actually mentoring or shadowing a decent transport manager who's not just cutting corners and paying it lip service? And I think I can't answer that question for you. I think that's certainly, if you're looking at mentoring, that's something to really think about is who is it that I'm allowing to mentor, and am I going to make sure that I only pick up the good habits and not the bad habits? But it's a really tricky thing, isn't it? Because there's, when you look on Facebook and you see the wide variation of different comments for the same question and different perspectives.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a bit frightening to think that there's actually, so many variations of perspective on the licensing act. So
absolutely, I noticed that a lot on the Facebook groups, and I have to pinch myself sometimes to realise that actually these are all transport manager groups. They're not, no disrespect, with the greatest respect in the world, they're not sort of driver groups or anything. These are transport manager groups, and some of the answers are wildly variation. So who do you know is right? How do we know who's right?
I actually think so. I think there are ways of gauging. who to listen to and who to not listen to. I think, and I know people. Thing is, it's difficult, isn't it? Because people will roll their eyes and go, "Oh, Pete, you're only recommending something that you're a part of." And I'm conscious that I want the podcast to be essentially independent and be an independent viewpoint. However, I think the only real way you can guarantee the standard of advice you're getting is potentially, so I'm just thinking on my feet, is potentially to look at earned recognition auditors.
Yeah.
Essentially, because they're the people who are speaking on a regular basis to the DVSA.
Yeah.
They're looking at earned recognition standard operators on a regular basis. So they've got a good understanding of the different management systems of the higher quality and more reputable operators. So I think that's probably a good place to start, is to have a look at earned recognition auditors.
Yeah,
I know, like I say, I know I fall into that category, and I know we fall into that category. But this isn't we're not recording this to just say come and use us, because actually, if you rung me and said, Pete, can you do some mentoring on the job? I don't know how I'd manage to do that, if that makes sense, because because the nature of some of the stuff I do. So. By all means, if you are interested in mentoring, do get in touch and we'll see how we can help. But I think it, that might not be feasible for people in certain parts of the country and those kinds of things as well. So I do think from my experience, I think looking at earned recognition auditors, at least, they're going to have had a transport manager CPC qualification for at least, the minimum standard is at least 2 years. They have to have had a 5-year refresher. They have to have had an auditor's qualification, and they also have to have some on-the-job training from the DVSA themselves. So I've got a really relevant example in my mind from a conversation I've just had. One of our sort of clients has just rung up and asked me a bit of a question around a trailer, which they on occasion they've got quite a few trailers, and on a very rare occasion they may go to one of their sites, and a trailer may get left for a little period of time, in which case it may go out of its 6-weekly inspection. And they were asking for my advice on what I think should happen, and I was very clear that essentially if that vehicle leaves that premises and goes on the road, it's out of inspection, and therefore there is a risk being taken to the operator licence. Now, when you think about this mentoring situation, it would be very easy for another transport manager to go, "Oh, don't worry about that, just get it sorted as soon as you can." Well, actually, that's really bad. That's really bad advice. It's very interesting how people, from a mentoring point of view, I think the point I want to make around that, and there's lots of other ways to get ongoing CPD, like the podcast and those kinds of things that we'll talk about shortly too. But when it comes to mentoring, I think it's very important to be conscious of who you're listening to, and maybe to get a second opinion on stuff. And you may well be picking up people's bad habits. Be careful to listen when someone tells you something. Listen, is that subjective? Is that someone's opinion, or is that fact? And I think those are the things to be really conscious of, because once you're listening to someone else's opinion, then that is just that, and that could potentially be at odds with the opinion of a DVSA examiner or the traffic commissioner.
Yes, or a court. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, because you know what, the other interesting thing about the Facebook groups is the surety of which some people answer the questions. And they answer them as if they're absolutely, this is cast in stone, this is what I'm telling you now is cast in stone. And you think about it and you think, Do you know what? If that was me, and I wasn't 100% sure, because they've probably got it wrong, I always caveat stuff with, in my opinion, or as far as I can tell, because you can never be sure, because there are so many nuances in this game. I've learnt many years ago, never to be sure about an answer if I wasn't sure.
Hi, it's Pete from Flagship Partners. We're really proud to sponsor the Fleet Geeks podcast. Flagship Partners offer a range of consultancy and training services to ensure that our customers remain compliant and have the best possible knowledge to be able to fulfill their work. If you're interested in support with any of our safety, HR or compliance services, or you want to train to be a transport manager or need driver CPC training, give us a call today.
And it absolutely harks back. It's a previous podcast we spoke about it, and actually it's really relevant in this conversation. There's a lot of people in this industry who have never been found out for something that they do wrong, but perceive it to be correct because they've never been challenged on it. Yeah. And that is what's called cognitive dissonance, I believe, which is where you've done something incorrectly for so long, but because no one's actually corrected on you, you start to believe your own lies, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm just going to search it quickly, but I came to that quite quickly. I need to just check that's the meaning of cognitive.
You've never sort of been that while you're doing that. I've probably recalled this story once before on a podcast. I can't just remember, but a company I visited once, I picked up on the way they were sort of securing the load. And the guy got really cross with me, and he said, no. He said, this load is approved by the DVSA. The way we load these vehicles is approved by the DVSA. And I kind of thought, well, the DVSA, they're not in the habit of approving this sort of stuff. Well, it was actually VOSA back in the day. So I finally got to the bottom of it. What it was is one of their vehicles was stopped once by a VOSA officer, and they never mentioned how the load was strapped. And they took that to mean that was approved by the DVSA. So, it is what it is.
Perfect.
What do you got on
so
it?
I think I might have the meaning of cognitive dissonance slightly wrong. But I think nonetheless it's actually quite relevant for transport managers. In the field of psychology, this is Wikipedia by the way, in the field of psychology, cognitive dissonance is the perception of contradictory information and the mental toll of it. Relevant items of information including a person's actions, ideas, beliefs, values and things in the environment. Cognitive dissonance is typically experienced as a psychological stress when persons participate in an action that goes against one or more of those things. According to this theory, when two actions or ideas are not psychologically consistent with each other, people do all in their power to change them until they become consistent. Yeah. So I think it is actually, I am barking up the right tree. The discomfort is triggered by the person's belief clashing with new information perceived, wherein the individual tries to find a way to resolve the contradiction to reduce their discomfort.
Yes, yeah.
So that is a thing. It's worth people looking at it. I think I am barking up the right tree with my use of it there.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
I think that transport managers often are solitary figures in businesses and therefore have to come to conclusions on their own. And I think once you've formed an opinion on something, it can be very difficult to change the opinion despite there being evidence to the contrary of that opinion. And therefore, there is this challenge around, well, I've never been told it's wrong. It doesn't mean that you've been told it's right.
It's right,
either,
yeah. Just because, the absence of that evidence to prove you're wrong doesn't, it's not necessarily the right thing to do. Just because you haven't seen any evidence, and I hark back to the company who thought they were DVSA approved loads because they got stopped by a DVSA officer who said, who never mentioned the load. So I mean, that doesn't mean to say it was right.
No, absolutely.
It just wasn't looking for that.
Exactly, and that's the thing. At any one time, when you get picked up at a DVSA stop or even at a public inquiry, there is only so much that can actually be analysed as part of that situation. A traffic commissioner's got potentially, I don't know what the average length of a PI is, but probably an hour to an hour and a half potentially. An earned recognition audit will take 2 to 3 days potentially, where you go through everything. And I think, for someone to go, well, I've been in front of the traffic commissioner and they've never said anything about that, doesn't mean a jot. It very much depends on what's on the agenda for the day.
Yes, absolutely.
And that thing may not have been on there. But yeah, I think, so what else is there? So we've talked about mentoring and being careful of that. What other things are there for transport managers when they're newly qualified, aside from mentoring?
Well, it's just getting the hard yards under the belt and doing things, not being, having the confidence to do things, to change things. As you said, like if you are mentored by somebody and then you're not quite sure whether they're doing the right thing or not, they might be, leading you up the garden path. That old saying comes into play, doesn't it? That that the most dangerous saying in the world is we've always done it this way.
Yeah, that's how we've always done it.
Just having a. I think as well. I mean, we myself and Pete will cry about this all day long. That being a transport manager is not all about knowledge. It's about communication, isn't it? And,
absolutely. Yeah.
And it's also about how to. You're having that confidence to challenge things. And to take the status quo and say, hey, I'm not quite sure if this is right. And I think I hate this phrase. I don't know about you, Pete. I hate the phrase, but people often say to me when we talk about these things, they're the softer skills.
Yes, that old term, soft skills. Yeah, because they're not as valuable as hard skills.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I think you're absolutely right. I think there's lots of things that are important, and communication and listening is one of them, and being open to being wrong, I think, is another.
Absolutely,
as well.
Yeah. People say to me, I made a comment a couple of days ago on about training driver CPC, and I said one of the biggest skills you can have as a trainer is not an encyclopedic knowledge, because I haven't got that. None of us have got that. I don't think. I've met a couple who probably have, but it's been humble. It's, a bit of humility goes a long way, doesn't it? Sometimes, And that I think is acceptance that you could potentially be wrong, or that
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that people often have is, particularly these days, and I sound like such an old man saying these days, Jesus, I need to check myself out. Mags keeps taking the piss out of me, but I think there seems to be this never-ending pace at which people expect to know everything, and I think with the onset of Google, wow, I sound so old now, but with the onset of Google, with so much information readily available, I think the issue you've got with transport management is that you can't Google a lot of stuff. No. If you try Googling anything to do with the legislation, aside from looking through the statutory documents, but if you try and actually Google to find the answer to anything, you're going to find a hell of a lot of contradictory and confusing information. Yeah. You can't actually Google the answers.
No.
You can't Google them because you can't trust anything that anyone else has written, for a start, other than the DVSA potentially, and sometimes they're not always factually correct either. No. But ultimately, you can't ask Google the right questions. So sometimes you just got to be a bit patient and expose yourself to different opportunities for learning. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, and also we talk about law a lot in our business, don't we? A lot of it to do, and law in itself is not black and white. It's interpretation all the time, and and you won't get Google to give you the answer. It isn't as straightforward as it always seems sometimes.
So I'm going to make a recommendation beyond mentoring that I think is important before mentoring, and I think if you do this before you go mentoring or choose a mentor, I think this is the right thing to do. So my advice to you is go networking. Fleet Geeks offer free networking, absolutely free, wherever you are in the country, on a Wednesday morning or on a Saturday morning each month. It's totally free, and one of the keys with transport management that we haven't mentioned is you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes you might not even know, and you don't even know what the question is either. No. And the beauty is when you listen to other people talking, they'll talk about things that you've maybe never even thought about before, or it's not occurred to you, or it's not part of the transport manager syllabus, or or even listening to the podcast. Hopefully that will help you along the way. But don't go paying for mentoring services straight away. Look at networking. Start to build a network of connections and people you can trust to ask. Because you know what? Sometimes when I don't know stuff, I've got a group of 5, 6, sometimes 10 people that I can go to and ask a question, and I might get 5, 6, 10 different answers. Yeah. But you're able to evaluate where your position is with that.
Absolutely.
So, what do you reckon, Mike?
No, I
do you
think
agree with that? Networking?
Absolutely. Networking, you can't. It is a lonely place. Whether you're an ETM or whether you're a transport manager within a big organisation, it can be a very lonely place. Quite often, the transport department is seen as a necessary evil. I think we've spoke about that before. and you are detached from the general business. So as a transport manager, you find it very difficult to speak to your peer managers, who may be production managers or warehouse managers or whatever. So, none of those will give you the answers you're looking for. So you're going to have to go outside and seek those answers from network. And I think that's a brilliant bit of advice there, Pete. Definitely.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So just a quick recap for people listening. Networking is one of your options. I really recommend that because you can do it very cheaply and easily. That is kind of what Facebook is anyway. That is kind of networking. But obviously, take what is said with a pinch of salt, because the other thing is people will say things on Facebook that they wouldn't say during a networking event. So let's get face to face with people. Let's get some networking on. Obviously, you've got mentoring as well. I'm just going to give a shout out to my mate and a fellow Fleet Geek mentor, which is Tom Reddy. He's got a course that he's written called Transport Manager Unlocked, I think, which I think is probably a good course for people to consider. And obviously we've got the peer-to-peer mentoring as part of the podcast, and the podcast itself. All of this stuff, Mike and I have given up hours of time freely to you to go back and listen to the Fleet Geeks podcast, and you've got a year's worth of content there. So
over 60 episodes now.
Yeah, and I think there's probably not many questions that haven't been answered so far, No. I think we have tackled a lot of the big stuff.
And on that note, we would love to hear from you if you want us to talk about anything, because 60-odd episodes, we are kind of running out of material now. So anybody wants to give us a shout out and tell us what you think we ought to be talking about, we are more than happy to discuss it.
Yeah, we've absolutely, we've got a pipeline of stuff, because there's always stuff changing and there's always stuff to talk about. But have Mike and I been blindsided? Have we missed something? What is there that you would like to ask us? And we're more than happy to answer any of that. So do get in touch. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the next one.
See you in the next one.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share with your friends and colleagues too. Join us for free on Facebook with the Fleet Geeks community for transport and fleet managers. Fleet Geeks offers ongoing professional development, networking and mentoring too. So get in touch with me, Pete Rushmer, on any social media platform to find out more.